The Radical Secular Podcast, a demand for justice, equality, and rational public policy. Subscribe at YouTube, Apple Podcasts, and all the major podcast channels. Visit our website at theradicalsecular.com for articles, insights, and our complete library of episodes. Support us on Patreon, and follow us on social media.
Hello and welcome back to the Radical Secular Podcast. I'm Christophe Difo.
I'm Sean Prophet.
I'm Liz Wilson.
Today's episode features a conversation between Liz and me about the Juneteenth holiday. For those of you who don't know yet, the Difo and Liz segment is an ongoing conversation between me and my friend Liz Wilson about experiencing American life as a member of a marginalized community. I speak, of course, from my perspective as a black guy in America, and Liz from her perspective as a woman in America, but the segment will also feature guests from diverse backgrounds in general. And now the goal of the Difo and Liz segment is to elevate marginalized perspectives. The ongoing theme of this segment is marginalized folks' personal experiences, and the voice of the Difo and Liz segment is hopefully thoughtful storytelling. Since the Juneteenth holiday was just last week, today's Difo and Liz segment features a conversation between us about the newest federal holiday. Most of us progressives get the gist of Juneteenth, or at least we understand what the event signifies, right? But how are we supposed to feel about it? Jubilant? Reflective? Should we all have cookouts or whatever? Fireworks? Stick around and find out. Liz and I are going to be thinking about Juneteenth, and we're going to tell you about it. But of course, since we recorded our segment, the Supreme Court overturned Roe v. Wade, literally today, in fact, the day of this recording. So we're going to lead off the episode with a 30 or so minute discussion session about how we're all processing this devastating outcome. So stick around for that. But first, I want to remind you that if you like our show, to make sure to subscribe, leave a review, check out our Patreon, and tell your friends to listen. New episodes post Mondays at noon Eastern on YouTube and all the major podcast channels, and you should check out our journal at theradicalsecular.com. The Radical Secular Podcast is brought to you by Cannibal & Co., located in downtown Jersey City and at shopcannibal.com. Cannibal, that's Cannibal with a K, stocks a rotating collection of goods ranging from apparel and accessories to home furnishings and fine jewelry. Cannibal weaves together its forward-thinking vision with its traditional roots to provide an expertly curated experience of unique and locally sourced finds. We're grateful to Cannibal for sponsoring our show. Okay, let's get into the t-shirts. Sean, you want to kick us off?
Yes, well, of course, I am wearing today my Ruth Bader Ginsburg shirt because, her legacy was just destroyed today. And the legacy of everyone who's ever fought for freedom and women's rights in the past 50 years was destroyed. And so it's really, I was reflecting a bit on the fact if she had lived maybe 6 months longer, maybe we wouldn't be facing this situation. And that's tragic because that also shows how much power we've lost as liberals, not just on the court, but in our ability to even maintain a pathway to the court. So we can, I'm sure, talk about all of that. But yeah, Ruth Bader Ginsburg, I mean, she knew the stakes.
She sure did. She sure did. Thanks for that, Sean. Liz, how about your t-shirt?
My lady, I got my shirt says hysterical female. I purchased this in 2016. It really nails how I'm feeling right now because, when Trump was elected and many of us freaked out and were told, don't worry, it's settled law. Mm-hmm. Don't be hysterical. Don't be, don't overreact. It's going to be okay. The system will hold. And it just feels like it's been the ultimate gaslighting experience. And we've all been through it. And I feel like women especially. So that's my shirt today.
Yeah, that's thanks for that, Liz. And I hear you, and sort of on a similar thread thread or similar trajectory. I'm wearing my Wonder Woman shirt. And I'm wearing that because I really think, I really think that women, if we're going to be saved from this like sort of onslaught of theocracy and bigotry, it's going to be women that are going to save us, because men got us. A society run by men got us here. And I think that, where I'm feeling right now is devastated, obviously, but, I believe that hysterical women, pissed off women, right, are going to lead the charge. I think this is just such a tangible, awful representation of what's happening to this country. That is loud. That is, and I think women are Wonder Women, and I think that we need to let women lead the fight back from this, and there will be a fight back from this. And so that was sort of my thinking as I donned this shirt today, and I am devastated. But we'll get into that. What a terrible day, so, Liz.
The darkest day.
It really is a dark day. Liz, you and I were just saying yesterday that by the time we've selected and workshopped a topic and an outline, we get some other piece of devastating news that we then need to talk about, right? It seems like a cruel joke that the very first time that we recorded anything was just after the leaked Supreme Court opinion about abortion a couple months ago, or whenever that was. It feels like, God, Jesus Christ. And we talked about the exact moment we're living through right now. We talked about this exact moment. And now here we fucking are. So I just want to start with you. Where is your head with this? Where are you right now with this?
I'm a little emotional. It's very fresh. And I feel like you and I have said several times, there's these things keep happening that we knew were coming. And yet it's still a shock to the system. There's just such a big difference between knowing something is going to happen and actually experiencing it. Yeah. And I knew when that draft leaked, I knew no one's changing their minds. There's going to be no Hail Mary. This is what has been planned since Roe passed. This is what they have been planning. And we've all seen it coming. So I was not surprised. But my husband came home. He was taking the dog to the vet. And he was like, so you want to plan a trip to DC? And I hadn't seen the news. And I said, why? And he said, look at the news. And I just knew. And I just felt like my stomach just dropped. It's a special kind of hell to be told so loudly and so clearly that your humanity doesn't matter.
Yes.
And I know there are other people who feel this all the time. I know Black people in America feel this all the time. And I do think that most women have this awareness on some level all the time. But we live, especially as a privileged white woman, in a world where you can kind of forget that sometimes. And so the same thing happened when Trump was elected. It was like a white male buffoon is more electable than literally the most qualified woman to ever run for the position. And that was like gut punch number one. Like, oh, we don't actually live in a post-patriarchy. Like this, we're in it still. It's just deep and it's harder to see because we've shed some of the obvious layers. So for me, it's like, not a surprise, but it feels impossible. It feels impossible that this has happened, that this is the reality. So it's kind of like my brain is trying to catch up with this and to grasp the situation. I've been kind of shaking all day just with this rage, and the adrenaline doesn't know where to go. Because it also feels like, as a woman, and women have been screaming about this for years and have been receiving pats on the head and, yes, dear, just hush up, or not even noticed at all, because women's anger is toxic in our culture. Men cannot handle women's anger. It shuts them down and stops them from actually listening to anything that we're saying. And so, to be honest, I feel like I've been screaming into the void for years already. And now it's like everyone else is like, oh, fuck, yeah, that was real? So I'm pissed, but I'm tired. And I'm like, I don't know how much else I can scream. So that's kind of where my head's at. I feel like I'm going to get to the point where hopefully this can kind of digest a little bit more, and then maybe I can get to the next stage of persevering and continuing to do the work and moving forward and being optimistic, but I'm not really there right now. So that's where my head's at. I have a lot to say about it, but I want to I'd love to hear what you guys have to say or think or questions or anything like that.
Yeah, I appreciate that. Sean, go ahead.
Well, I have tons to say. And I remember when, 1973, I was 9 years old, and that's when this decision first came down, and I saw the reaction. And the interesting thing about it is that American churches weren't really keyed into this issue back at that point. Some were, and of course, the church that I grew up in, Cult, really was very, very much keyed into it. And some of the messages and dictations, sermons, I guess you could call them, that came out after that from my parents had to do with this idea that because the U.S. was now giving women the right to abortion, that the U.S. would be judged and destroyed by God as a result of this. And it was very fiery. It was like, and it let me know early on as a child as to how important this was and how important it, because if the right wingers think it's important, it's important because their entire purpose in life is control and hierarchy and oppression, right? So the idea that they would react negatively, it took me until I was more of an adult to understand what this was really about for women. And like you said, talking about second-class citizens and talking about not, being able to have your personhood. And, that perspective was a long time in coming. And unfortunately, there are a lot of people in the country who are celebrating today. I mean, really celebrating. This is a triumph for the religious right and for the hierarchy and for the patriarchy. And I can remember going back to when George W. Bush was elected in 2000, and you could see the early sort of hints of this theocracy, this descending theocracy going on when he established the Office of Faith-Based Programs. And, as the Supreme Court has chipped away at the separation of church and state, and now we're seeing this is an explicitly religious decision. And a lot of people back then were telling me, I was angry, I was strident. I had different reasons. I don't have a uterus, so I had different reasons for being angry about this, having grown up around this type of the justification of this oppression and seeing the results, seeing the corruption, seeing the pain that was caused to people by all forms, not just being opposed to abortion rights, but being opposed to homosexuality and, the concepts of sin and the concepts of even of karma, these Eastern concepts, and it just turns out that when you go through, you realize that all of these religious concepts have been used to oppress since the beginning of time. So that's about around the time when I came out as an atheist, and I started really talking about this in terms of theocracy and sort of sounding the alarm. And people told me that I was overreacting. Lighten up was what I got constantly. People would try to play things off as a joke. It's like, oh, I bet you're fun at parties, things like that. And here we fucking are.
Yeah. Here we are. This bothers me, and it's difficult because I'm a progressive and I care about social justice and I care about justice. And it all matters to me a whole lot. And, but the thing that I thought today was just about the women in my life. That's who I thought of. I thought of the women in my life. And, and I try to make the analogy for myself between this and say, and a race-based issue, right? Right. Because like something will happen with race, and I feel it I think in a very special way, right? Because I'm Black. And so I thought back to how I felt around this Buffalo shooting, and I'm with you, Liz, is, I felt like I wasn't like functioning well, and like I couldn't, especially in the very beginning. It was just like almost just like this shock, and that's sort of where I feel like I am right now. But this sort of shock of I can't believe this is actually happening, and that sort of feeling of like trying to it's amazing how the brain suddenly starts and thinking of ways that it might not be true, like looking, like you said, the Hail Mary you said before, I think was really an important thing. It's like, and then there's this sense of trying to come to terms with that just in the first instance. And I think both of you are expressing, and I think a lot of us are feeling this way, particularly women, people with uteruses, that just this sense of helplessness, and rage and like shakiness, like, like I feel like I've been getting these shots of adrenaline through me over the course of the day as I reflect on it. And, there's so much to unpack, I think, and many people will do that over the next couple months and weeks and months of like, what are the implications for this down the road? But I think that today, and it's just today, and I can see it in everyone's, in our faces, and especially you, Liz, is, this is, we knew it, we expected it, but it's not the same as it actually happening. And my heart really goes out to you, Liz. My heart really goes out to the women out there who, especially the women that I know, just because I know the women that I know are usually pretty passionate about this. And so, my heart just really goes out, and it's just one of these frustrations of just like, God, I wish there was something I could, just powerlessness, right? Just powerlessness is very overwhelming, the powerlessness. But let me get off my soapbox here. Liz, you want to jump in?
Yeah, just in terms of feeling powerless, I live outside of Philadelphia, and I'm considering going to the protest there tonight. But there's also a part of me that's like, I'm fucking tired. Like, I want to go and I want to scream, but I'm tired, and it's hard for me to combat this feeling of helplessness. Like, what's that going to do? I don't, in my heart of hearts, believe that. I believe in protest, but right now I'm feeling like that a little bit. And I wanted to touch on something that you said, Sean, about your upbringing. I mean, I was raised Catholic. I was taken to pro-life rallies as a child. Like, I held the signs by the side of the road. And it's been the whole abortion issue has been an interesting one for me, because I can see both perspectives so clearly, having grown up like that. And I grew up in a very religious, but not dogma was not like a big thing in my upbringing, but religious spirituality. But I did go to Catholic school, so things were hammered into me, not necessarily at home. But when it came to abortion has always been a hot issue for my parents, who may watch this, so I have to be careful. But it's interesting. It's been interesting to see their growth over the years in terms of this issue. None of us are where we were. All this to say, I can understand where people are coming from, and I can understand, if you only look at it up to a certain point, how you can feel good about this. But the issue is here that you're missing a whole set of conditions and circumstances and information and input and awareness if you are celebrating this right now. And I think part of my problem is there's so much in my head, there's so much to say, and yet I feel like it's been said. And in the world that we live in right now, the only people who are listening to me are the people who already agree with me.
Yeah.
And it's kind of like, how are we gonna dig ourselves out of this?
Mm-hmm.
How? I just can't.
It's a bit like a nuclear explosion that's gone off, and we don't know where the dust is going to settle, and we're all disoriented. The flash has blinded us. The explosion isn't even over. It's like, the word that came to mind this morning when I first wrote about this was savagery. There's going to be so much savagery. And that's because what I think of now is this is like, I read a meme, I think Coral Annika Teal posted this today and said that this was the worst thing that's ever happened to rape victims. And when you think about now how, their intention clearly stated more than once by many, many different people is that people who are raped, that is still a child, not the child's fault. The child must be brought to term because God willed that child into existence through this act of rape. And when you strip everything off from it, once a woman loses her bodily autonomy, she also loses her ability to consent to sex, right? This is part of the same package. If you're being forced to give birth, then ultimately you're being forced to have sex, because in a lot of religions that it is considered to be wifely duty to submit to the husband physically, sexually, to obey, all of those things like that. And so this is a legal codification of that, and it's not different from legalizing rape, if you ask me, because
100%. Well, and this is overturning Roe versus Wade is the codification of rape culture. This is rape culture. And like you were saying with this idea that people have that whatever the circumstances are that led to the baby, it's not the baby's fault. And that's what I grew up believing. So I feel like I can, with some authority, state that those who have that belief are not considering the woman at all. Her humanity, to my point earlier, is gone. It is insignificant. It is wiped out because of that cluster of cells, regardless of if you believe when life begins. So, and it's an extension of that ignoring of the woman's experience and her bodily autonomy is rape culture. It's rape culture, right? Consent is not important in this culture. It's because it's a patriarchy. That's not how patriarchies work. They don't care about women.
Well, there's been a lot of memes floating around to that, talking about this. And some of them have say things like, women, if Roe v. Wade is overturned, women will have less rights than a corpse because you can't harvest organs from a corpse, right? In some ways, they have less rights than animals because animals, animal cruelty is against the law. You have to feed your animals. You have to take, and so in this situation, I mean, there was just a story that came out in the news about a woman who a few days ago was in Malta, and Malta is a country, Catholic country that is extreme, no abortions for any reason, not even to save the woman's life. And she was vacationing there. Yeah.
Kind of like Texas.
Well, it's worse than Texas because at least in Texas, there's, 6 weeks or whatever. But, well, up until today, I don't know what it's going to be after today. But anyway, this woman's, she's vacationing there. Her water breaks. She's 7 months pregnant, and she's going into sepsis, right? After a few days of not being able to get care. And she had to be airlifted out of the country to Spain in order to get medical care to save her life. And this is just going on vacation to a place like this. Now, in some U.S. states, we're going to live permanently in a place like this.
Yeah, I think that's right. Yeah. And it's just.
Yep. I mean, Missouri already banned
just
it.
like that. Yeah. Just like that. Missouri already did. Missouri.
Missouri. Yeah.
Missouri.
And there'll be many more states that are doing this, and people will be cheering. And, I think, I don't even know. People texted me. I'm known as like the political guy among a lot of people that I know, right? So I get like a million text messages about this, like people that I haven't talked to in a while, and my response has consistently been, I don't really know what to say. I really don't know what to say, and I hope that I am not being sound callous. or anything as I talk about this, but as we've talked about, and I know the three of us agree that, right, this was baked in for a long time, right? And we said at the beginning, right, the fact that it happened is incredibly painful and shocking in the moment right now, but we did know this was coming in a sense, right? So
we did.
I think now, and I think today is the day where we all have to just live with the discomfort and the shock and the pain, and maybe tomorrow we can start thinking about what we're going to do about this. But that said, the one way to sort of reframe this, and I think is what I've been trying to do to reframe this is that maybe, just maybe, this is a call to action to some extent. A real, because like you said, Liz, people always say, it's not going to be so bad. You liberals are always overreacting. You were saying this too, Sean, right? Like you liberals are always overreacting. And I'm like you. I'm like the two of you, right? It's no surprise that the three of us are sitting here right now because we're the kind of people who talk about this stuff a lot and have been screaming into the void. Like, this is what's happening. It's happening right before your eyes and it's unfolding. And if he wins in 16, that Roe v. Wade is gone. We were literally saying that in 2016. Yep. Literally saying that in 2016. That's what happens. And people were like, oh, come on, it won't be so bad. And so sometimes, like the only way people realize that it's going to be so bad is for it to get so bad, right? Yeah. And I think that is, like you said, like I say, I'm not trying to minimize the significance of this. What I'm trying to do is, where is the ray of sunshine here? Because we have to get to the next stage, the stage of being ready to fight back, and we're not there yet. And I don't think it's reasonable. It's reasonable not to be there yet, but we have to get there. Go ahead, Liz.
Oh, it's just, of
course,
as a woman, It makes me think of a conversation I had with my therapist lately, because this was after the draft was leaked. This wasn't even, and she's like, so how are you doing? And I was like, well, the place I live is making it part of the law that my humanity doesn't matter. So how am I doing is I kind of want to burn it all to the fucking ground. Like, I kind of feel like none of these rules, according to people who are interpreting the Constitution right now in the Supreme Court, apply to me because I'm a woman. I'm not in the Constitution.
Right.
So what reason do I have to follow the laws of this country if this country doesn't recognize me as a full human being? Right? So to your point, Difo, I feel like a little bit of what's happening. You thought that people were mad before. You thought activists were crazy before. Shit is going off right now. People are protesting outside of Supreme Court justices' homes. I saw a picture of a woman today, butt-ass naked, writing all over herself, getting arrested in front of someone's house. We are getting to the point, women are being pushed to the point where we have nothing to lose. And when you have nothing to lose, you can become dangerous. Yeah. I mean, we saw this with George Floyd in 2020. Like, everything that was happening then, I feel like it was a similar feeling that, like, literally, what do we have to lose right now? You are showing us and you are telling us that we don't matter to you. Our lives don't matter to you. So tell me why I should behave.
That's right.
Yeah.
Right?
That's right. Yeah. Go ahead, Sean.
I was just going to say that I think that it's tough to bring this up because it creates a conflict within among women, right? And that is that there are many, many women who support the patriarchy, and there were women who didn't want suffrage. There were women defeated the ERA, and there is a very sizable contingent of women who are happy about this. And we talked about this a little bit last week when we were talking about how abused women and women who are murdered by their partners and things like that. And then people say, well, why don't they leave? And then there's all this victim blaming that goes on. It's bullshit. Because there are two different survival instincts that are being pitted against each other. One is the survival of safety and having a home and having a family and being in a community. And the other one is your personhood as a woman, right? And those two things are in conflict. And within a lot of the reason why women they certainly didn't leave before they could get credit cards or before, because they couldn't. It was very, very hard to make it without your husband. And so you were stuck in this marriage. But now in this situation, and you could call it Stockholm syndrome, you can call it all kinds of things, but it was really the realities on the ground for women. And you look at Handmaid's Tale, you look at how brilliant Margaret Atwood was in laying this out and showing that women were some of the primary oppressors, and that Serena Joy was a feminist who actually, spent her life and her career, and spoke publicly to bring about this Gilead at great cost to herself, even to the point of, eventually losing one of her fingers, because she read something, right? I mean, she put herself in a horrible situation because she thought it was the right thing to do. And, I know that there's a lot more complexity to that, to the tale, but I think it's important to understand how much women play a role. Aunt Lydia, same thing. She is someone who was, very, very unhappy in life and in love, very frustrated with living in a world where women had rights. And so she reveled, she excelled in, once it became a world of oppression. And I think that right now we're going to be seeing the rise of a lot of that, a lot of women who are, you're going to have to show your cards as a woman at this point. And so that's,
Yep.
I don't know what we do with that.
Yeah. No, I think you're 100% correct. And it's actually something I hadn't considered, but in my haze of fury today. But, I mentioned this on another show, the idea of crumb maidens, these women who are, and I think it's a question of choosing their literal physical survival over their freedom, right? And that is what happens when someone is traumatized. They come up with ways to survive. And it's a survival mechanism. They hang on to the coattails of these white men in power because they think that is how they're going to best survive. So that you're right. I think that'll be interesting going forward. And I think that we have a very long road ahead of us.
This is why your perspective is so fucking important, is because what you just said there, I think, is so critical. And I want to just repeat it and amplify it because, right, this idea that, right, and we talked about this in our recording, which everyone will hear. And that is, right, that it's really hard to place people in reality. We like to put things in these dichotomies. It's like, well, these people did that, like this, these crumb maidens are like this because they're bad. And what do we do about them? But then when you really peel back the layers, right, it's actually more complex than that, right? They are, in fact, that's a survival mechanism. That's why they're doing that. And the same thing. And I think that is such a critical point, Liz. And I really appreciate you bringing that up, and you too, Sean, for bringing up the concept. I think one of the things that really hit me in what you were saying, Liz, and forgive me for looking for the ray of sunshine here. It's not very bright. It's not really sun at all. I mean, it's really, I don't know what it is. Like a flashlight from the 80s, like really yellow, bad light, So, but the thing is, right, is that, right, oppressors consistently this is a problem with being an oppressor, is that because you think you can dominate other people, you tend to misjudge how much people want to be free, right? You tend to misjudge that you can only push people so far, right? And when you take away personhood, and when you talked about this concept of realizing, being told that you matter less, like that is, I can identify with that feeling so much, right? It's like in Buffalo, really, for whatever reason, Buffalo was a really big one for me. And it was just like, it's a reminder that, like, oh yeah, America you're not really as good as everybody else. Like, you just matter less. You matter less. And so we're not going to take stuff. And so This is this is like that on steroids, right? This is like from the Supreme Court saying from the very top, yeah, you matter less. And I think it's hard to overestimate or to underestimate. It's easy to underestimate how devastating that is to an individual. And also how, like you said, you can that's how you push people to a place where they have nothing left to lose. And then that's where you get riots, right? That's when you get violent revolutions. And the only ray of sunshine in all of this is that, oppressors will consistently underestimate the spirit of individuals, right? For freedom. And it doesn't mean like instant results, but it does mean that that's where we derive the power to fight back. And so I when you said that, Liz, I thought that was really poignant and important. So just wanted to repeat that.
Thanks.
Yeah.
No, I think you're dead right.
Yeah.
Yep.
Go ahead, Sean. Do you have something?
I have one more thing I wanted to bring up,
course,
and that is that I think that there are, there's a lot of factors that play into this. You talked about, Liz, your Catholic upbringing, and I had, of course, my religious upbringing. And one of the bumper stickers that my mom had made up, and everybody in the church had one, it said, "Abortion is first-degree murder of God." All right. It was the sick thing. And it was meant to be deliberately provocative, right? I mean, it was meant to shock people. And when you think about, you have to really unpack that. You have to unpack what is being said there. And I think when you look at what the word God represents, it represents people's ego, represents men. I mean, it's a male. Yahweh is definitely male, not female, and our whole culture is based around that. And so it's, the idea of the man who is really a small part of the birthing process, just the seed, right, is being murdered if a woman decides not to carry this baby to term. And associating the word murder with it has been used to also deflect from, for example, these mass shootings, right? Because I've had these conversations where I say, well, these mass shootings are horrible. And they're like, well, you liberals support abortion. You support murdering babies. It's like, it just ends the argument.
Ridiculous.
There's no, and so this is a very insidious, diabolical point. And I think that, unfortunately, a lot of liberals don't understand how tightly this is connected to religion and even spirituality, right? Because if you start thinking, I've even heard New Agers talk about, how they don't like abortion because it, that does something to the soul or whatever. And the whole dualistic idea that we are something more than mammals is what creates this concept that, to practice an abortion, which has been going on as long as there have been humans. As long as humans have existed, women have figured out ways to end their pregnancies, to somehow tie this into a soul, right? And the fact that we have an existence that goes past our lives somehow, and that we existed before, is where they get you. And
for sure,
I just want to caution liberals, because a lot of liberals say, well, you have to work with religious people, and of course we do, because there's so many of them in the U.S. But it's like, you can't imbibe just a little bit of this poison, because once you start with this dualistic religious thinking, you're in for a penny, in for a pound. And pretty soon, you've got these moral qualms about this fetus, and you just can't get over it. And I think that's the danger, is that a lot of liberals do believe in God. They do believe in, and so they're conflicted about this. They don't have a clear sense that this is about women, not about these fetuses, and it's about souls, and it's about making karma. If you do this, you make all this karma, and it's, again, I could be on my soapbox about that forever, but this is why it's so important that we get off this God belief, because it's so easy to make this case for religious people that there's a moral problem with it.
Yeah. Liz, you want to comment? Yeah, go for it.
The casual assumption of a religious belief, a specific Christian belief in this country, is quite staggering. As somebody who grew up in Canada, and I moved here when I was 15, and just there's a level of assumption that you can talk about the Bible, you can talk about God, just drop it into casual conversation, and no one's going to bat an eye, because they don't. Nobody does. It's in the freaking thing that we said every morning in school about pledging allegiance to a flag. Yeah, so I think you're completely right about that, Sean. And I have been one of those people who was spiritual and felt conflicted because I did feel like there was life in the womb, and it didn't make me want to get rid of abortion, but I definitely felt like an emotional tension there. But at the end of the day, there's a life that's already existing out in the world, right? Like, can we consider it like just a little bit, maybe? But yeah, and I think it's important to keep our eyes clear when we're discussing this subject, because it can get very emotional, and for that reason that people equate it with religion and souls and spirituality. And
I think that's right. And both of you, thank you for that. And we are winding down here. But in terms of the soul, I mean, the problem though is, right, there's so many religious people, right? That's like that. And that is apparently a feature of human culture, is the thing, right? So, I mean, I think that, I think it is important to talk about, right? Like, look, I say this to my wife joking all the time. It's like, if you believe that a guy rose from the dead, then you can believe anything, right? And that's the real problem, right? Like, if you, right, like, and how do people compartmentalize one portion of their life where magic is allowed, but in this part of their life where for some reason, no, the rules of physics exist, right? And it's absolutely maddening and very, 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 very dangerous. And then the next question is, though, that, because like one thing, like, how do we work around that? Because even the most progressive, a lot of very, very progressive people are religious, right? Yeah. And so, that's just the reality, let alone the conservatives. But even like, right. So we have to find a way. And this is a real challenge, I think, for all of us is how do you find a way to talk about this stuff in a way that is that abortion and abortion rights, in a way that overwhelms that individual's qualms, that internal qualm that you're talking about there, Liz, where it's just like, and I think the way you do that is just talking about the people who are suffering, right? Like the real human beings that are suffering, because people like disconnect that, right? That there's going to be real people and children, by the way, suffering. Yes. But because of this clump of cells. So, well, Liz, I want to give you the last word here. What are you going to be like? Here's a quick question. What are you going to be doing tonight? Like, what is your self-care routine? Is it just screaming and freaking the fuck out? Is it just being sad and depressed? Is it doom scrolling? Just about that in your last and your final words.
That's a great question. I've been doing all those things except running. I did think about running, and then I thought, I don't want to burn it all off before the podcast. I gotta save some fire. I think I don't know what I'm going to do tonight. I might go to Philadelphia and scream a little bit. I might just start binge watching some show that has nothing to do with anything. And I might doom scroll. But I think the most important thing that I'm going to do for myself is to allow myself room to do whatever I need to do and to feel however I need to feel, and to not worry too much that I'm not doing the right thing for the time, because I think it's important as people who care about social issues, and especially right now, when things are happening that are so heightened and so emotional, yes, that we are patient with ourselves, because the last thing that we need is our internal voice yelling at us that we're not doing what we should be doing. I think, if like 4 weeks go by and I'm still lying in bed, not doing anything, maybe that's another thing. But like, I'm going to give myself a little bit of space to feel what I need to feel, and maybe not be super productive about it. Maybe I will. I don't know. So that's what I would say in terms of, being an activist or making social change. I think the most important thing is to take care of your inner world. And sometimes you're going to get like adrenal overload and feel exhausted and feel like shit. And that's okay too. It'll pass. So that's what I'm going to do tonight. We'll see. And I don't know if this is a good final thought or not, but something that I've been thinking a lot about, and that has been it's a general recurring theme when it comes to the patriarchy, is I think something that happens is we all of us have some degree of blinders on when it comes to recognizing it in our daily life or larger life or our government. And the reason is just because it's the culture we were born into. It's how we were trained. And so the number one tool that I use to help me see things clearly is to flip it, right? So imagine if men could have babies. Imagine what that would mean. I propose that if we want to make abortion illegal, that we do that with the caveat that the government funds the woman's entire pregnancy experience from beginning to end, including taking care of her rent and her food and anything she might need, medical expenses, obviously. And then when the baby is born, whoever impregnated her is responsible for raising that child. And the woman can be involved to whatever degree she wants to be, but that it is the man's responsibility. And if there was a way to make that happen, I can guarantee you nobody is getting rid of abortion. Nobody. Because that's the reality in this country. And that's why poor women and Black women are disproportionately going to be fucked by this, because they are the ones who are already struggling. And then we're telling them, no, you got to keep this kid and you got to raise this kid. I don't know how you're going to do it because we're not going to give you any assistance, but have fun. So this is my takeaway. I just encourage everyone to use that tool going forward. Flip the situation and you will see the level of absurdity in it. And hopefully, maybe that'll help people also understand the absurdity of getting rid of abortion or thinking of abortion as anything other than healthcare. It's healthcare. You're so right.
That's awesome.
Period.
Yeah, totally right, Liz. Totally right. And thank you so much that was a great conversation, both of you. And the Difo and Liz segment is next on the agenda today. And I hope that you enjoy listening to it as much as Liz and I enjoyed creating it. And we will see you on the other side. The show's now started, I think.
Oh, okay, great.
Just like that.
Perfect. All right, well, how about you tell me about your last 24 hours, Difo? In this wonderful world that we're living in.
Well, Liz, you just told me a second ago before we started recording here, you told me that the Supreme Court had just come down with the with another terrible decision. I've seen the handgun decision, and living right outside of New York. You lived in New York before. You know what it's like to be on a crowded subway. You know what it's like to walk around a crowded Times Square. The idea of somebody walking around with a fucking pistol, and not just a pistol, right? But a pistol and some sort of savior complex, right? Like feeling like, oh my God, something's happening to me. Even though nothing's happening, right? Nothing life-threatening is happening. But, oh my God, something life-threatening is happening to me. Let me pull out this gun and start shooting people. Because that's what ends up happening, right? Like, when you have a hammer, everything looks like a fucking nail. And that's the problem with people running around with handguns who don't need handguns for, like, for personal protection.
Right. Well, and let's just also add to this that everything that happened in Uvalde has completely trashed this whole good guy with a gun mythology. I mean, did you hear the most recent thing I heard is that the husband of one of the teachers who died, I don't remember how he found out. Maybe she called him, whatever it was. She had been shot. He ran to the school.
Oh my God, yes.
With his gun, and they took his gun away. So explain to me again
make this shit up.
How an average citizen being armed is going to prevent these kinds of things. Just explain it to me, because it doesn't seem true to me. But maybe I'm naive. I don't know.
And I mean, I don't think you are. and
I don't either.
Look, I mean, think about, and what happens if this guy, by the way, does run into the room, right? Is he gonna go Rambo style? Is that the plan? Do you think, maybe he was a trained operative of some kind. Maybe he was an ex-Navy SEAL guy. And maybe that's what he was doing. But if he's just some guy who has a handgun, I mean, is he going to run in there and just start shooting people? I don't know. That makes me uncomfortable too. So first of all, like, the cops aren't letting the guy do the good guy with the gun thing anyway. And statistically speaking, the good guy with the gun who runs in only causes more trouble.
I mean,
come on.
You brought up New York. It makes me think about the subway shooting a few months ago. And if someone else had been armed there, I'm pretty sure that there would have been fatalities, you know, because then you have all you have is more bullets flying around. No one even knew where the guy was half the time. So
that's exactly right.
I don't see how that helps.
Wait. Can you imagine being in a subway car and someone says he's got a gun, and then someone else pulls out a gun, and like, I mean, the doomsday scenario, doomsday scenario in a moving subway car. Yeah, I just it's astonishing.
And if you've never been in a New York subway, that you have no way of understanding, like, it's sardines, and you have nowhere to go.
Nowhere to go. Nowhere to go. No. On a downtown 6 train at 7 p.m. Are you fucking kidding me? They have to, you are like this, literally just jammed in there. There is no movement. And some guy pulling out a gun there, I mean, you will get, people will get trampled. People will suffocate. It is just a horrible, horrible thing. And like we were saying, Liz, I mean, here's the thing is that, and I don't mean to be trite or flippant about this because it's going to sound that way, because I am very, very cynical at this point. But, you know, this was all baked in since 2016. In some sense, like, I'm kind of numb to it. And I don't mean I'm numb in the sense that I don't see the horror of it. I mean, I'm numb in the sense that I can't afford to be battered by the feelings about this all the time. Like, right? Because if I am sitting around being battered back and forth by every Supreme Court decision that comes down, I'm going to have a really unhappy life. And I'm going to have an unhappy life anyway because the world's falling apart. You know, I got to find some way to handle this. And I don't think that becoming numb is the answer, right? I don't think that's the answer. I don't. But
I also don't know how much control we have over that. I think that's that's like our psyche's way of coping with this. You know, you can only take so much before you become numb to an extent. And I feel like that's going to be an ongoing conversation with us as we go forward with this show. Like, how does one pay attention to what's happening in the world, give a shit, do what you can without completely shutting down or falling apart? Because it feels to me like those are the two options that I'm experiencing. It's, you know.
I'm laughing. It's not funny, but.
No, but it's outrage and then complete shutdown and rejection of all information until the next horrible thing comes along, which I feel like, and I could be, I don't know if I'm correct, but it does feel like things are happening more frequently now. Like you were saying, it's... Oh yeah,
definitely.
It's like every time we get together to talk, we have this, something, like at least one thing, usually multiple things, have happened in the 3 to 4 weeks since the last time we spoke.
That's exactly right. And even more than that, it's like, even so it'll be 3 or 4 weeks since the last time we spoke. And then 2 weeks after the show, we'll start talking back and forth. We'll be texting back and forth about, what should we talk about next time? And then we come up with something, right? And then we're like, okay. And then we start putting together an outline. And then almost inevitably, since we've started this thing, right, between that moment and the actual day of the show, something else horrible has happened. And I think that that this is probably going to be par for the course. And I hate to take up our first question of like, how are you doing with these sort of topics? But I mean, that's what's happening. So, right. I mean, that's the reality of what's happening. Yeah. So another interesting thing that's happened is that I just got back from Alaska, and one of the things that I have been, and just actually kind of dovetails a bit, or maybe I'm just sort of trying to force a round peg into a square hole, but nevertheless, when I was in Alaska, and Alaska is very far away, it feels very far away from everything. One thing I noticed that was very, very consistent in Alaska is no politics. I didn't see Trump signs. I didn't see "Don't Tread on Me" flags. I didn't see any of that. I mean, maybe I was there for 2 full weeks and I saw maybe 3 Trump related items the entire time. One I saw twice because I ran back in the same direction. That's how few there were. And you would think, wow, Trump country, right? Like Alaska, red, don't tread on me. You would at least think don't tread on me stuff would be out there, right? Because they're all about that. Like I'm out in the wilderness shit. And they are, in fact, by the way, out in the
like
fucking
libertarians
wilderness.
is my image of it.
Exactly. Yeah. That's what you get. But there's none of that. And it's almost as if it just doesn't exist out there. And I think part of it is that it's just so far away from everything. I mean, the experience of being out there, like stuff like, it's as if, right? Like, first of all, there's this whole like frontier vibe to it, and we're like, oh, we care about survival out here and nothing else. Doesn't matter what the color of your skin is or your X, Y, and Z, as long as you are in this frontier spirit or whatever. So there's a lot of that. All this to say is that getting back has been kind of jarring in that way, because it's just like, oh, right, all of this is happening and it's happening fast and it's like super heavy. And I think it's hard to realize how much that weighs on you. And here's a big factor, by the way. I didn't have reception for like 90% of the time that I was there. So that means I wasn't getting news alerts. I wasn't on social media, right? Like, so most of the time I didn't have access to that. And so, you don't realize how heavy what we're all bearing every day emotionally with the medium bombardment that we're getting. And I'm not saying it's bad that we're getting the medium bombardment. It's good that we have the information, but it's heavy shit we're dealing with every day. And we got to give ourselves a break.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. You know? Absolutely. I mean, I was just, like a couple of days ago, my husband I guess I looked a little, I don't know how I looked, but he asked how I was doing. And I said, I'm feeling like, I said, it's not necessarily bad, but I think because I'm having such a heightened sensation of impending doom.
Yeah.
And again, I'm laughing. It's not funny.
It's not funny. No, I know. I'm with you.
But man, yeah. But along with this comes also a heightened appreciation for the little things, the nice things, the beautiful things in my life. So I have been feeling that sort of poignancy as well as the impending doom. So that's really, now, wow, that's super interesting. I'm so glad. That's super interesting, Liz, because that's a similar experience I've had. And I think that, and again, a theme that I think we'll be talking about a lot over the course of our conversations is this, how do we cope with this? And I do think that getting down to community, family, right, the little, sometimes the mundane things of everyday life and how precious they are, how lucky we are to have them. I think that can help give us some perspective. Now, it's certainly not going to solve those problems. It's certainly not going to make us feel better about those problems, but it might make us feel better in the moment. While I was in Alaska, I was listening. I do a lot of listening to military books when I'm on these trips. And I was listening to Vietnam in particular. And I was listening to a Vietnam related book, and there was a guy who had something what's called, immersion foot, which is something that you get if you're in the jungle and your feet are wet for weeks and months on end, and you get, and it gets very painful and it ends up going to gangrene and everything like that. And he was, it was the 60s, and he is Vietnam, everybody has these like nicknames. His name was Hippie, and he was a guy, he was like from California, and he was Mr. Peace and Love, and he had a peace sign. Like he was like one of those like quintessential like Vietnam guys. And the point is that with each step, he was in absolute agony. And he would say, I remembered this woman, and he said girl, of course, but this woman that I was hanging out with right before I left. And she said, like, in terms of meditation, she was like, can you get through this moment? Or can you get through this moment? And then you get to the next moment. Can I get through that moment? Because half of what we're dealing with is the fear of what it's going to feel like in the future. That is like most of what like, present discomfort is, right? Is fear that tomorrow it's also going to suck. And next minute. So I'm using this as an analogy to say, like, I think that is a tool, not a solution to the problems we're facing, but a tool for us to keep our sanity, to stay reasonably in some state of okayness as we go through these challenges, as we go through this, as the world falls apart around us. Yeah, I think you're 100% correct. I mean, it goes back to that thing that I've been thinking since Trump got elected, that it's like we've been in this training ground for how to get your mind right. You know?
Yeah, that's exactly right.
Yeah.
Totally.
Yes, sir. Yeah. Well, yeah, cool. Alaska, huh?
Oh, Alaska. Oh, being black in Alaska. What an experience that is. I mean, it was just like being dumped back into Montana again in a lot of ways. But the good thing is that I'm like, when I was younger, there's this tendency to want to suppress the fact that you're black, right? And just sort of fit in. And I thought the most interesting thing was, going to innkeepers or whatever, where I had made reservations months in advance. And Lindsay, frankly, was a huge help in all that, and give credit where it's due. I showed them I had talked to these people on the phone. And so when people talk to me on the phone, they assume I'm white. And so when they see me in person, there's sort of like this jar of like, oh shit, like, hello. And it's not,
you see their assumptions clicking into place.
Oh, absolutely. I can see it happen in real time. And I've been doing that for so long in my life that I know exactly what it looks like. And I expect it. I mean, I expected this woman, Colleen, lovely woman, by the way, lovely woman. But as I met her, I saw this, and it's just kind of funny. It's like, and it just makes me glad that I'm not who I was way back when, that I'm like, I'm much more comfortable with who I am, and what blackness means to me, and that it's not sort of this crushing sense of, oh my God, will they accept me? Or, like, oh God, I'm not like them in some way. And so, that is, so in that way, it was a really positive experience. I think the hardest experience, the weirdest thing about it was just that it's sunny all the time. And so it's just, and not sunny, but just daylight all the time, right? It's deeply maddening on some level. Like maddening.
Yeah.
It drove me a little crazy for the first 3 or 4 days. It definitely did.
I'm sure.
Yeah.
Well, and you look on the flip side of it, in the winter, it's dark all the time. Like, so people up there, they got a whole different psyche happening.
Exactly.
Yeah, that's toughness, man. That's being able to handle that kind of stuff.
That kind of shift. I mean, fucking crazy.
Yeah.
But yeah, I mean, we'll talk more about it as the show goes on. But it was quite an experience. It really was. But should we talk about Juneteenth?
Sure.
You don't have to. We can talk about whatever.
No, I'm good with that. I'm good with Juneteenth. It's funny. We should have probably done this last time. And then it would have been like the timely, really. Right?
It would have been timely, honestly. Well, yeah, let me do my spiel. So to set up the whole thing, because last week was Juneteenth, and I'm an employment lawyer, and more fundamentally, I'm a writer and I'm an editor. I am not a scholar of Black history or white history or any history for that matter. And you know how to use Google as much as I do. If you want to get into the weeds on Juneteenth, you should check out renowned Black scholars like Leon Litwack and Elizabeth Hayes Turner. And I got some information from them and fascinating stuff. But I would like to set the stage for our conversation today, Liz, by providing a bit of context. So here is a reporting mashup I put together from PBS and the New York Times. Two great resources, obviously. So on a little bit of background. So on June 19th, 1865, about 2 months after Confederate General Robert E. Lee surrendered at Appomattox, Virginia, Gordon Granger, a Union general, arrived in Galveston, Texas to inform enslaved African Americans of their freedom and that the Civil War had ended. General Granger's announcement put into effect the Emancipation Proclamation, which President Abraham Lincoln had issued nearly 2.5 years earlier. Juneteenth, an annual commemoration of the end of slavery in the United States, has been celebrated by African Americans since 1866. When Texas fell and Granger dispatched his now famous Order No. 3, it wasn't exactly instant magic for most of the Lone Star State's 250,000 enslaved people. On plantations, white enslavers, and I changed that name, by the way, from slave owners. On plantations, white enslavers had to decide. I think it was masters. I think they had before then. I was like, I don't like that. So on plantations, white enslavers had to decide when and how to announce the news, or whether to wait for a government agent to arrive. And it was not uncommon for the white enslavers to delay until after the harvest, because of course. And in Galveston City, the ex-Confederate mayor flouted the army by forcing the freed black people back to work, again, because of course. Newly freed black people who acted out on the news did so at their peril. As former slave Susan Merritt recalled, you could see a lot of N-words hanging to trees in Sabine Bottom right after freedom, because they catch them swimming across Sabine River and shoot them. In one extreme case, a former slave named Katie Darling continued working for her mistress another 6 years. She whipped me after the war just like she did for the war, Darling said. Now, this scenario was hardly a recipe for celebration, which is what makes the story of Juneteenth all the more remarkable. Defying confusion and delay and terror and violence, the newly freed black men and women of Texas, with the aid of the Freedmen's Bureau, found a date to rally around. In one of the most inspiring grassroots efforts of the post-Civil War period, they transformed June 19th from a day of unheeded military orders into their own annual rite, Juneteenth, beginning 1 year later in 1866. So, Liz, are you like me in that you didn't know that Juneteenth was even a fucking thing until very recently? Because I certainly didn't.
I am like you in that way. Yeah, in fact, I think last year was the first time that I had heard of it.
Yep.
Which isn't really that surprising when you think about how in our own worlds we all are. And I feel like that's been another gift of the Trump years, is the increasing awareness of how very much we are in our own lanes and how unaware we are of other people's realities, especially when you're looking at people who are in terms of the power dynamic higher up on the chain.
Sure.
Whereas you can, not to get too much into a tangent, but, if you're one of a marginalized group, you do tend to know things about the oppressing groups, but it doesn't go the other way around.
Great point. Very, very good point.
So as a white person, of course, I didn't know about Juneteenth because, it's not my world. And but it's an interesting topic. I don't feel like I should lead on it as a white lady. But I will say that one of the things that I found interesting, because, as literally having known about this for maybe a year, and I only recently became aware of the fact that it wasn't, I really feel like it's kind of sold to us white folks as like a yay, slavery's over celebration. Because the news didn't reach these people until 2 years after emancipation, blah, blah, blah. But the reality is not that the news didn't reach them. It's the news was either withheld from them or they just simply were not able to act on it, because just because you are told you are free doesn't mean you have the tools to become free, to actualize that freedom.
I think that's right.
As you just said, in all that information. So that to me that's very interesting, because it really speaks to that, like the power dynamics. And I feel like it continues in so many ways today. Great
point. Yeah. That's such a great point. And that's, as I said, right, if people want to go find out like all about Juneteenth, they can go find out all about Juneteenth by people who do this stuff. But what I found was really interesting about it is, I think you nailed it right there, is this idea that like, right, even the story of liberation is packed with stories of oppression. Right? Like, even when we're talking about literally celebrating freedom, even within that, there is still a racist crackdown Always. And I think that's why I wanted to bring it up, because I think this is, like, to your point, this is something that we just, that even within the brand new context of Juneteenth, which for me is brand new also, it's already being sanitized. Right? It's already being sanitized, just like every fucking thing else. Like Martin Luther King's birthday, sanitized, right? Now it's just this story of love and bringing everybody together. When no, people were trying to lynch the fucking man. He was murdered by white people.
Malcolm X. I mean, talk about sanitizing a person.
Exactly.
I'm not that they've failed largely, but like, it's like you have to change it into this little pablum so that the white people can swallow it without choking.
Exactly.
We gotta take care of the white people.
Always. Take care of the white people. That is a critical thing here. And so, like, there's a sense in which finding out about Juneteenth felt to me kind of like a personal failure, right? Like, it's something that I should have known about. I'm Black after all. It felt like another example of how isolated I've historically been from a sense of Black identity and Black American culture in the United States. But mostly, and I think this is going to be an unusual position to take, and I'm not taking it just to be a contrarian, but mostly I was cynically glad that corporate America has found it in its business interest to use Juneteenth for marketing purposes. Like we were talking about before, it's really awful that we're stuck with the system that we're stuck with. Like, you and I just talked about this. Maybe it was the other day when we talked on the phone. Like, right, we live in a system dominated by corporations, and the reality is that normalizing of a huge social issue by corporations is a critical factor in improving the lives of the people who are directly affected by that social issue, given the system we're in, right? I've made this analogy before. The Cosby Show, right, was the pop culture. That's a huge factor in why normalizing the idea of an affluent Black family, that the Black family isn't just Black people are lawyers, Black people are doctors, Black people are not, and the Will Smith show is the same thing. Black people are not just this caricature of poverty and drugs and crime, right? Right?
Yeah.
A huge thing. Will and Grace too showed that America, that gay people aren't just aren't just the Pride Parade, aren't just sex, right? They're just people, like they're people like everybody else. So we need massive structural shifts in our system to even begin to work, to make the system work for a reasonable number of people. And no doubt having to celebrate the corporatization of Juneteenth and Pride is a really shitty place to be. But we know that already, right? Yeah. We know we're in a shitty situation. The outlook for justice in America is bleak as fuck right now. We just talked about it. So we progressives do not, and this is just my view, do not have the luxury of picking and choosing from where we accept our progress, right? We need to claw desperately for these small wins, these Band-Aid wins, even as we fight ceaselessly to make the large structural changes we need to really sort of solve this nation's problems. So I think that, like, the hard leftists and progressives would say, like, oh, it is awful that Juneteenth is already being corporatized. But you said it the other day when we talked, like, this is the system we live in, though, right? I mean, I don't know. What do you think about that?
Yeah, I think I had not formulated it quite so cohesively, but I definitely feel this with Pride, this knee-jerk kind of like, ew. And with Juneteenth, I think on some level, it's been part of my reticence to sort of like get involved. I mean, the biggest reason is because I'm a white lady. Like, what do I have to contribute to this conversation? And even, do I have the right to celebrate this? I don't know. Or not celebrate, but yeah, I guess I'm finding my way. It's a new thing, right? So what is my role in that? And do I have a role? But yeah, getting back to what you're saying about corporations and corporate corporatizing. Is that
I don't know. I use that word, and I did use it, and I don't know that it's actually a word. But for us, for the purposes of us, yes, it's a word.
It can be a word.
Totally.
Yeah, it feels uncomfortable for sure because it feels gross.
It does feel gross
because there is. I think I have a desire to keep those things authentic and stay true to the human emotion behind it. And corporations who most days of the year could give two shits about gay people or Black people suddenly making money off of it. Like, did you hear this thing? Like, Target has like a whole section of like pride stuff. And I just feel like that's not celebrating it. You're trying to make money off of this. But to your point, I also think that this is the system that we live in, and that, like with Will and Grace and the Cosby Show, if it moves the needle in the right direction, then I think, who am I to shit on that, you know? But it's that dichotomy. It's the holding the two things at once. That, like, yes, this is the system we live in, and let's celebrate this moving of the needle while still holding on to our ideals, and that and that we are working for more progress and more significant progress and real progress, and not like commercial progress. Totally. But that we can hold those two things at the same time. I mean, there's so much dichotomy in all of this. In Juneteenth itself, like I feel like we were talking about this before too, that the idea of celebrating something that was actually a real travesty, and I'm not talking about slavery, I'm talking about the fact that it took that long for people to actually start to become unenslaved. And I feel like, is that really something that we're going to celebrate? So I guess, yeah. So I feel like that dichotomy is something that we're very uncomfortable with as humans, and being able to hold on to both at once. And I think that's why I have trouble with like far left, because it's like, if it's not exactly this, then it gets rejected.
Exactly right. Ideological purity.
And it's just not the world that we live in. Like, if you actually want people's lives to get better, then you can't do that. It's like with this gun control thing that's being debated right now in the Senate, that I think they're voting on very, very soon. It's not a great, it's
sure
not great.
It's sure not.
It's not. But if we can get some Republicans to vote for some kind of gun control legislation, that is a huge victory. And we are moving the needle. It's not where it needs to be, but we are pushing.
And it's going to save lives. It'll definitely save lives, right? Like I was watching some dude on TV, expert in this area, and he was saying, like, just changing from 18 to 21 will save lives. That will save lives. That will cause, and it's not going to save as many lives as we would like, right? It's not as drastic as we would like. It doesn't stamp out the white supremacy that is like so intertwined with gun culture, you know.
It's in our, you
know what I'm saying? It's DNA. In our DNA.
It's DNA.
It's all together. Yeah. And like, to your point, and I think I you know, this is a kind of a hobby horse of mine. And so like, this is probably a theme that will run through many of our shows. And this is this idea of ideological purity. I don't want to shit on the hard left and the far left, because they are our brethren and sistren, right? Like, these folks, we agree on 99% of things. And by the way, I am perfectly happy if I'm a politician, I'm perfectly happy to work with the far left. I am perfectly happy to come up with, but the problem with the far left, a lot of times, is they're precisely far left because they're unwilling to work and compromise, right? And it is, so I want to just make an analogy here. I was, as I said, and oh boy, I've been saying a lot recently, and everybody's tired of hearing it. I just came back from Alaska, and I flew up there and back on a 737, which is the Greyhound bus of the skies, right? So it is right. It didn't come with anything, right? And so the TV offerings were very, very slim. Even though the flight was almost 8 hours long, it was like flying to Europe, but you were flying on a fucking bus. Fine. So the movies weren't good. So I ended up going back and watching movies that I watched before that were good, like from like 10 years ago or whatever. So I watched Lincoln again, and it was it was like literally on Juneteenth, the day after, or a couple days before Juneteenth, and and that's not why I picked it. It was just a good movie. But anyway, I also watched, by the way, Interstellar again. If you haven't watched Interstellar in a while, go back and watch that. Just not for you. You don't like that kind of movie.
I've never watched it. It's not about It's not that it's not for me. I just, for about 10 years, I haven't really watched movies.
Oh, okay, fair. Yes.
Because I fall asleep.
You just don't have that.
But now I don't have any excuse, because now we're into shows and we'll watch 2 episodes of an hour-long show. I could be watching movies. I just need to have the mental shift.
The big thing too is that, and this is to be frank, is that shows now are way better than movies. Like, movies are made for the lowest common denominator. Most of them are just garbage, which is my point. I was on the Alaska, I'm watching these movies. I'm like, these movies are terrible. I don't want to watch any of these mass market. It's like eating McDonald's. It's garbage, right? The writing is terrible. Everything about it is terrible. But Interstellar is an excellent movie, and Lincoln is a very good movie too. And I'm not. It's not as good as Interstellar. But the point I'm bringing it up is that Thaddeus Stevens is a major character in the film, and he was known to be absolutely uncompromising and vocal in his belief that black men and white men were truly equal in every way, not just under the law, but genuinely equal as individuals. And that was a radical position to take in 1864. And
as a total ignorant, sorry, was he black or white?
Which is even more remarkable.
Thaddeus was white. Okay.
Right? This is a white guy, powerful white congressman, powerful. He was like the leader of the caucus of the radical Republicans in Congress, right? And it's just interesting that there was a caucus of radical Republicans who were radically progressive. That's where we were. That's where that party used to be.
Yeah.
Remarkable. So the pro-slavery conservatives decided to use his radicalness to portray Stevens as too radical. So the goal was to undermine the chances that the Congress would ratify the 13th Amendment. So they invited the press to the House of Representatives to listen to Thaddeus's speech, during which they were sure that he would out himself as ultra radical, right? He would surely proclaim, as he had done many times before, what was unthinkable in society at the time, that black men and white men were truly equal. But Thaddeus doesn't take the bait. Instead, he limits the basis of his support for the 13th Amendment in this long, eloquent speech to the fact that all men should simply be treated equally under the law, right? He limits that. He does not say that the radical thing that would undermine the amendments, right? So I think there's a lesson here for all the ideological purists out there. Surely no one would argue that Stevens should have tanked the 13th Amendment because it wasn't radical enough, or because Stevens had to conceal his true beliefs during the House floor debate, right? Sometimes these are the deals we have to make with evil if our goal is really to reduce human suffering, right? So that's sort of just to hammer home the point that we're talking about here. And again, this is such a hobby horse of mine, because it drives me crazy that on the left, we cannot get together. We cannot, if we could we're on the right, they are so lockstep because they're fucking fascists, right? They're fine.
Oh my
gosh. They're fucking fascists. They're literally locked. They're goose stepping together toward fascism. That's what they do. Right? On the left, we're all over the place. Oh, I got this and my ideas and your ideas. And meanwhile, shit doesn't get done. And then we have President Trump, and we have I only like saying President Trump. We have the fascist Trump and everything else,
Unless you can fact check me and go back earlier when I mentioned Trump, but unless I slipped up, then I made it a point to. I have never put the words president, the word president, in front of his name.
I'm the same way.
I've consciously
even in writing, and a lot of times in writing, I won't even capitalize I won't even capitalize the T. I purposely put the T. Like, he doesn't deserve that. Fuck that guy. He is literally a wannabe fascist. Literally a wannabe fascist. Fuck that guy.
Oh my God. He's almost worse than a real fascist, because he's a fascist only because he thinks that's how he's going to have power. Like, he doesn't care. He doesn't have ideals.
No ideals. At least real fascists have ideals, right? At least they're actually
right.
that they stand for something other than.
He stands for one thing. That's him.
That's it. Accumulated
Trump.
Power.
Yep.
You know what I want to ask you, and so just to give you a question here, Liz. And so I recently had a conversation with somebody in my life who shall remain nameless. Let's call them Jan. And Jan, we had a conversation recently, and they were like, and they asked me, and I think I give them a little bit of credit for asking me, like, you know, how do you feel about Juneteenth, right? And there's a part of that that's, and this person's white, by the way. So there's a part of that that's kind of very like icky in some sense, right? But not really. I mean, really, I'm interested. Like I appreciated the person asking me about it, and the person was said something along the lines of, you know, I don't know how to feel about this. Am I supposed to feel jubilant? Am I supposed to feel reflective? Am I supposed to feel and also they mentioned that I've gotten marketing emails from Black people, Black business owners that I know, in which cite Juneteenth as or that cite patronizing their business as a good thing to do on Juneteenth. And my answer, and so I had an answer to that. I guess it took me a while to get around to it. And I thought it was a very good question, right? How are we supposed to feel about Juneteenth? But I wonder, and I'm asking, and I understand. And I guess this is a bit of a challenge, I hope, maybe, and feel free, obviously, not to, if you don't feel comfortable getting into it. But I'm very interested to know, as a white person, when you are faced with, all right, here's Juneteenth, like, I like what, and what goes through your head? Like, what are the feelings you have associated with it? Like, I mean, what I hear from a lot of white people is like, you know, I don't want to screw this up, right? I don't want to be offensive, and along those lines, and so I don't know what to say on along those lines. So I'm just curious to see, you know, and be very clear, like, I will not be offended, right? Like, I mean, I know who you are, I know the kind of person you are, and I feel like when I talk to white people about this, I need to say that, because I think that is probably, and like I said, I have a lot of white people in my life.
Because you want to take care of our feelings.
Not even that. I just want, I mean, I guess to some extent, I'm definitely socialized to do that, for sure. But I think, more so, I want an honest response, and I don't want it to be like, to be through the lens of, I don't want to hurt his feelings, right? I can handle it. Believe me. I live in I live a Black person in white America. I'm used to getting my feelings hurt, you know? So anyway, and feel free to be awkward about it. It's perfectly fine. I think that's the kind of conversation I think we want to have here, right?
Yeah. I totally agree. Thanks for the question. It is awkward, but you know, it's something I've been thinking a lot about since we had decided that we were going to be discussing Juneteenth. 'Cause 100% my first response was, what the fuck could I have to contribute to that conversation? And I have concluded nothing. I have nothing to contribute of value, but since you asked, I guess I've been thinking about it a lot. And I think there have been kind of several steps of progression as I've progressed through my thoughts about it. My first one, and to be honest, even when it first came up last year, at first I was like, oh my God, how has this existed? And I've literally never heard of this. So that kind of blew my mind. And then I thought, well, it was kind of along the lines of what you're saying, that I didn't want to say anything for fear of saying the wrong thing or doing the wrong thing or being the wrong thing. And that's kind of where I was at for a while. I mean, really up until we started working this show out. And I still am in a place where I strongly feel that my voice does not need to be heard. I do not need to input anything. But I also think that what you are asking is important, because I think it is valuable, not just valuable, it is necessary for all of us, especially those of us in whatever form are in an oppressive role, like me as a white person, you as a man, like that aspect of who we are is in a power group, right? So we need to get comfortable, and I mean white people, with fucking up and being awkward and saying the wrong thing and getting called out, and learning how to handle that with grace, and just, to get comfortable with the possibility, and not the possibility, the likelihood that, because you will say the wrong thing. It's guaranteed. At some point, you're going to say the wrong thing. You're going to piss somebody off. You're going to hurt somebody's feelings. You're going to be offensive, because it's like learning about our own whiteness is the first step in dismantling white supremacy. And if we can't see how we benefit from it, then we cannot possibly get rid of it, right? And so you have to see it first. And that means sometimes you're going to get yelled at, or you're going to be dismissed, or you're not going to be listened to, or you're going to offend people, and you're going to look like an idiot sometimes. And I say this like it's easy. I'm still very uncomfortable with it, but it's something that is, and this is, I think I've alluded to this or mentioned this in previous episodes, that for me, after Trump was elected and I went to the first Women's March, and I remember after that, there was a real kind of amplification of an issue in white feminism, where we were not listening to Black women and Black voices, and not, the word is escaping me, but not coming to terms with our own racism and the racism of white feminism. So in that period, I felt like a very deep shift in me, because for sure, the number of times I would read something that a Black woman would write, and I would feel like indignant. Well, but that's not me. How could she say that? And really having to like force myself to just sit with discomfort. And it took a while, right? Like I had to kind of like retreat from it a few times and dismiss it. And that's self-preservation. And only after a while, and like literally forcing myself to like be in it. There's a woman named Rachel Ricketts, and we can link to her stuff in the show notes, but she runs an anti-racism for white people, like
sure
course, basically. So I took that.
Oh wow,
and
you
it's
did
just,
that?
It felt like the scales were falling from my
man,
eyes. I did.
Oh man, I wish more white people would do that. I so wish more white people would take that step.
I mean, I would love to say that it's because I'm a great person, but honestly, I think it actually, if I'm brutally honest, that stems from not wanting to fuck up. Like, I was like, teach me to understand what you're saying, so that the next time I'm speaking to a Black feminist, right, I don't put my foot in my mouth. Which, whatever.
Sure,
I guess whatever
definitely,
gets you there to some extent. But
however it gets you there.
But yes. So I was thinking about all these things when I was thinking about Juneteenth, and realizing that one of the reasons that I didn't know what to say was because I literally have no idea what to say. And I don't know if that's because on some level I'm freezing up because I'm afraid of saying the wrong thing. Yeah.
Oh my God, that was so helpful, Liz, and that's exactly what I wanted to talk to you about, and these are exactly the conversations I as a Black man want to have with white people, because I think these are the conversations that move the needle forward. I really think that this is what it is, right? I mean, a combination of you taking that course, which gives you sort of the background, right? Like the gist and like, right. And I don't know what that course is like, but I'm sure it's very good. And that's something that I've considered possibly getting involved in, something like that in the future as well. Like, I think that's kind of a cool idea. I think the combination of that and then being prepared to have these kinds of conversations, and it doesn't even like, there doesn't have to be some sort of agenda or an outcome that we're looking for. I think it's just getting comfortable having these conversations so that we don't live in such a segregated environment where like everyone we know is either white or black or whatever. Right. Or, and I think that's super important. And ironically, there's a way in, first of all, there's a way in which I have not done this, and this is sort of my important, and this is something that's on my list now, and I've been thinking about it, is I haven't done enough or really any independent research into feminism, and I know it from watching it from the outside, really, but I feel like if I expect and want the white people that I know, the white people in my life, and white people in general to take this kind of stuff seriously and take a course or read a book or whatever, then I best be prepared to do that myself. And I am prepared to do that myself, but I haven't done it and I need to do it. So in that sense, you're a step ahead of me, for sure. It's but thanks so much for sharing that, and I really hope that in these talks that we have, that these are moments that we really can be honest with each other about where how we're dealing with this stuff and how we are failing to deal with it, and everything else. And I think that this is an interesting dovetail because you were talking about a bit about white fragility there, right? And so we have a few minutes left. I don't know. Do you want like we should talk a little bit about your experience maybe with some reactive white women.
Yeah. Oh yeah. So this is something, I mean, if the listener doesn't know, Difo and I, we have conversations leading up to the show to kind of figure out what we want to talk about. And one day you asked me what was on my mind. And I was in the middle of this sort of like online argument is too strong a word, but kerfuffle, let's call it.
Yeah, I love
it. But somebody had posted something about Alice Roosevelt, who was, the first daughter back in the day. And I guess she was a bit of a shit stirrer and just defied a lot of expectations of her gender and lived kind of a wild life. And people were talking about, how great she is, blah, blah, blah. But honestly, my first reaction when I read it was like, yeah, she could go to a lot of parties and have funny dogs with weird names and never get married. And she could have a voodoo doll and name it like after I forget which politician it was, some politician she didn't like. And, and so I just put a little post that said essentially like, yeah, she sounds great, but like, let's keep in mind that her social standing and her wealth really allowed her more wiggle room than your average woman. I really didn't think that was inflammatory. I just thought that was like, hey guys, let's not forget her hair is brown. I mean, it's just a fact about her. And I was met with some real vitriol from a lot of white women who repeatedly equated the word privilege with no suffering, or, they're like, well, her mother died in childbirth. Well, one person essentially said, rich people have problems too. Well, rich kids get neglected by their parents, so they have real struggles too. And I found myself having to remind people, and that sounds a little bit I don't know. But my responses were just condescending is the word I was looking for. My responses, I was like, how am I still having to say to people, I don't mean to say she didn't suffer in her life. That's not what the word privilege means. And I did realize after, I live in a bit of a, progressive bubble. So I think sometimes I forget that everyone isn't on the same page. And so I was a little bit taken aback by it. But also just the more, I don't know, the more that I think about it, we talk about the word privilege in terms of, racism and patriarchy and things like that. And I feel like it's been discussed maybe even ad nauseum in the more progressive arenas. But I felt like as we had kind of started to come to a place where people were understanding that privilege doesn't mean easy. It just means there are certain things you have that other people don't have, which might allow you to have certain things that they don't have access to. But then so I was thinking about this. I was like, well, this is more like talking about class privilege, really. So maybe that's why there was this response that surprised me.
Yeah.
But yeah, I mean, it's been an interesting thing. And again, like since 2016, this idea of white privilege that is just like, it was so earth shaking to so many people for so long until we came to this agreement about, oh, no. Privilege means this.
I mean, it's like, do these people think that Black women don't lose their kids in childbirth? Right? You know what I'm saying? Because her argument is like, oh no, well, she lost her child. Yeah, but so did a lot of poor Black women. So what's your fucking point? And in fact, Black women are much more likely to lose their kids. Poor Black women are much more likely to lose a kid in childbirth.
Right. And a couple of people were even like, I don't really understand what that's got to do with it. Like, what's the point in talking about her privilege? And I just wanted to be like, it's not like, it's just, it gives you a bigger picture, right? And I think in the way that we look at everything, it's relevant today. Like, this is why you can't look at someone. I don't know. Okay, I have to formulate my thoughts. But the fact that people completely, I think it's part of this mythology of the American dream, that people completely dismiss the concept of privilege as
That's a great point.
Factor.
Great point.
Right? Literally any kind of privilege is dismissed, even money.
Yeah.
Look at Trump.
Right.
He didn't get there because he's smart.
Exactly.
He was born rich, always been rich, right? He's also a white dude. So that was my point. That's all I'm saying is you can't discuss something in the fullness of its reality and truth if you don't recognize all the facets of their life.
Including privilege. And I totally agree with you on that mythology we have in the United States, as if everything that you have, you've earned. Right. And if you don't have anything, you've earned that as well. Right. Because that's how we have to that you deserve that. That's how we justified. That's how we justify the stratification of society. That's how we justify poverty. That's how we justify suffering. 100%. We say, well,
Kim fucking Kardashian. Let's talk about Kim Kardashian right now. Let's get trashy.
Yeah, that's right. Recently.
Her thing about yes. The problem with people in this country is nobody wants to work anymore. My jaw hit the floor. I thought,
the arrogance.
Honey, you wouldn't know work.
Exactly.
If punched you in the face. I want you to try working 3 minimum wage jobs. I want you to just try that for a second and then tell me about how people don't want to work.
Unbelievable.
God, that's just completely dismissing. I mean, and that ties back into this mythology of the American dream, that the only thing that you need to do to become a Trump or a Kardashian is to work hard.
And
That's it.
Work harder. Exactly. Just work harder. Give more, make more money for the capitalist that's at the top. Then don't worry. Maybe one day you will be a capitalist, right? And so, and this actually dovetails dovetails a little bit of what we were talking about in terms of this dichotomy. And I think that's another theme that you have brought up multiple times over the course of these conversations. And I think it's so true, is that we as human beings like binaries, right? We like it to be clean cut, right? If you work hard, you succeed. If you don't work hard, you fail. But it's just not that simple. Nothing is that simple. I can work my ass off at a minimum wage job, do everything I'm supposed to do. But if I wasn't born with the resources, if I wasn't born with didn't have the education, I'm going absolutely nowhere. And that is the reality of it. And so same time, I can be born into a rich world and become president of the United States and just be absolutely mediocre at best, right? And become president of the United States. George W. Bush. If he was just an average guy, he would be a mediocre nobody. Mediocre nobody, but he gets to be fucking president of the United States because he was born there. And so this, again, there's so many ways in which this dichotomy manifests. And in terms of the Juneteenth discussion, it manifests we think that it has to be either a solemn holiday or it has to be a jubilant holiday. Those both things can exist in the same holiday. They do for Memorial Day. We talked to you and I. Everything has this dichotomy.
Yep, 100%.
Makes us uncomfortable.
We don't like it. It makes us uncomfortable.
Exactly.
We're like, tell us what to do. I mean, even somebody saying to you, how should I feel about Juneteenth?
Exactly.
Give me the formula.
Yes.
I mean, that's why religion exists too. I mean, right? Give me the playbook.
Exactly. Just give me the rule book and then I won't fuck it up. Right. And that goes back to what we were talking about on the way up to this, on the way up, as we were ramping up to this conversation, right, is, this idea, and this is so fundamentally human, that we care about what people think about us. No matter what we think, no matter what we say, no matter what we project, we care about what people think of us. And if we fuck up, right, it's built into our biology. We're afraid of being ostracized because ostracization means death. It means, right, that's what it means. Fundamentally in our lizard brains, that's what it means. And the last thing we want to do is be ostracized. So we don't want to fuck it up. So we want rules, clear rules. But the problem is that being human is fundamentally not clear. It's just not. It's just not.
Right.
We really are.
We're messy people. We contain multitudes, and we can never be just one thing. And then the other thing too is that you're looking to someone to give you the rules. But then let's ask the question: who's making the rules?
Exactly.
And what are they getting out of it? Right?
It spirals out of control very really fast that way. Because if you're looking for rules, you're looking for somebody to give you rules, right? And then now you have gurus, right? You have prophets. You have This is where cults come from, right?
And this ties nicely back into your own experiences. And look at that.
Full circle. But look at that. We are just at about an hour too. So it's like really we put together the perfect show.
Perfect
just
circle.
Now. That was a perfect show. Welcome back. I hope that you enjoyed the Difo and Liz segment. And we are now just going to wrap up the show. I want to give each of you the opportunity to give some final thoughts. Sean, you want to kick us off?
Sure. I enjoyed that segment about Juneteenth, and I wanted to bring up one other thing that I don't think you guys talked about or maybe even heard about, but it really struck me. And it was there was an insurance agency, and Juneteenth is a federal holiday and they had to close. And so they put some snarky thing in their window sign about, Juneteenth, whatever, enjoy your fried chicken and collard greens. And it was just awful. And I wrote about this because it was so appalling. And I think it was Progressive and maybe Travelers. They decided to stop doing business with them. And so people are being punished. But the idea that someone would trivialize something so monumental and such a solemn occasion, because remember, American plantations were gulags, and there's family separation. There's hundreds of years of abuse. And finally there's freedom. And now there's a federal holiday many, many decades too late, hundreds of years too late, I guess. Mm-hmm. And that this is what someone decides they want to do. And I'm not a First Amendment fundamentalist. I don't think people should be allowed to say things like that. I think it should be more than just losing your business. I think if you say something like that, there should be, beyond social ostracism, maybe even jail. I don't know, but it is so appalling, and it's such peak white privilege that you would trivialize something so important to a group of people that at no cost to you, right? At no cost to you. There's not a price for being, generous and genteel and decent, a decent human being. And that's all I got to say.
Fair enough. Good point, Sean. Good point. Go ahead, Liz.
Well, to that end, I think that is important to think about in terms of Juneteenth, in terms of abortion, in terms of all this progress that we want in this country. People are afraid of change. Change is hard for people. And I think even more so right now when we're living in literally completely different realities. There's no communication going on, and it's going to be even harder to win hearts and minds going forward. So maybe what we're seeing with all these huge events that are happening in the last few years is just we're pushing to that point of explosion where it's like everything has literally been stripped away, and people are getting to the point where they have nothing to lose, and it's just going to come to a head. So I don't know. But I do think that it's important that we remember that these incremental changes like Juneteenth, and that people will push back. They have a hard time with this, but we have to keep going. We have to keep going. And we have to celebrate every win, because they may be small.
That's right.
But it's what's going to sustain us. There's a reason, like Moms Demand Action, their motto is keep going, because it's not going to happen in the big, loud, flashy moments. It's going to happen behind the scenes and quietly. People who just don't stop. They just don't stop, and they keep going. And I think if we can bring anything away from this, I think that is what it should be, is keep going.
I think that I can't thank you so much for that, Liz. I think that I can't think of a better sentiment here. And, and I'll just say that this is a marathon, not a sprint. This is a war, not a battle. We are on our heels right now. We are on our heels. We are fighting at best a rear guard action as we withdraw. But we have to think then as strategically how we move forward. First of all, take care of ourselves so that we can fight. If you don't have, if your people, if your soldiers, if they're not fed and mentally and emotionally prepared to fight, you lose no matter what. So it has to start there. And then we take it to the next step of figuring out what we're going to do. And I think that, as you know, I'm sure that there'll be so much written and talked about, and we'll all think about this more. This is all so fresh. I'm sure there'll be another episode about this issue. So again, everybody, thank you so much for being here. And remember that if you like our show, to make sure to subscribe, leave a review, check out our Patreon, and tell your friends to listen. New episodes post Mondays at noon Eastern on YouTube and all the major podcast channels, and you should check out our journal at theradicalsecular.com. I'm Christophe Difo. Thank you for being here, and remember, wherever you are, you can be radically secular.
Radical Secular Podcast is written and produced by Christophe Difo, Sean Prophet, and Joe Okipinti. Logo and main title designed by Tim Stetner. Post-production and original theme music by Sean Prophet. Special thanks to our support team, Lindsay Brightman, Jillian Sky Jacobs, and Lori Field Okipinti.